Chapter 16. Personality researcher Gordon Allport has identified 6 criteria to assess mature personality development: establishing a sense of self, effectively relating to others, possessing emotional security so that one can accept oneself, understanding reality, achieving insight and humor, and living in harmony with a unifying philosophy of life. Those who are capable of achieving a mature personality also have positive self-concept, or a sense of, this is the real me. Rather than simply reacting to the aging process, healthy middle-aged adults are able to adjust their thoughts and behaviors to accommodate aging and preserve their positivity. If they're able to not see aging as a negative, but as a time of feeling like they've finally made it and figured things out, they'll be much more likely to be positive and to maintain a healthy self-worth. Erickson talked about generativity versus stagnation during this stage of life. He believed that middle-aged adults want to set the next generation off on the right path, inspiring them, teaching, and mentoring them. There is support for Erickson's theory in the research, showing that life satisfaction, happiness, self-esteem, and sense of purpose do contribute to a midlifer's healthy adjustment. McAdams identified 2 deep desires: the communal need to help others and the personal need to do something that will transcend death, leaving a legacy. Robert C. Peck furthered Erickson's theory by proposing that there are 4 specific tasks that must be completed during middle age: valuing wisdom versus physical powers, socializing versus sexualizing in relationships, valuing a person's unique personality instead of seeing everyone in sexual terms, emotional flexibility versus impoverishment, expanding the social circle, particularly when loved ones die and children leave home, mental flexibility versus rigidity, with rigidity evident when they become too set in their ways and close-minded. Erickson has been criticized for his view that midlife is a period of turmoil and upheaval, so some prefer Peck's variation on Erickson's theory, which is a bit more positive. The Midas study also lends support to Peck's view, showing that most middle-aged people experience greater levels of life satisfaction. Although midlife crises are possible, they're not as common as some assume. The great majority actually deepen their relationships. In fact, those in their 50s are thought to be in the giving stage, since altruism, volunteerism, and giving back to the community are priorities and commonplace among this age group. In the 1970s and 80s, Daniel Levinson researched first men and then women and identified stages that both genders progress through during adulthood. He found that men typically encounter a transition between 35 and 45 and then undergo an even more intense transition in their 50s, which is often equated to a midlife crisis. He further outlined sub-stages from 40 to 65, midlife transition, 40 to 45, during which men accept the end of their youth and try to transition to middle adulthood, the entry life structure for middle adulthood, 45 to 50, when men find their place in midlife, the age 50 transition, 50 to 55, when men reappraise their lives and future directions and will struggle if they haven't made any adjustments and are continuing with patterns developed in young adulthood, the culminating life structure for middle adulthood, 55 to 60, when men realize their midlife goals, and the late adult transition, 60 to 65, when men undergo an even more profound appraisal of their lives and prepare to enter late adulthood. In the 80s, Levinson studied women and found that women typically centered their lives around their families and children and were less involved in the world at large. Women who tried to work, raise a family, and maintain a loving marriage often felt like their lives weren't as satisfying as they'd expected. They were seriously impacted by the empty nest when children leave home. He studied 3 groups: those who were stay-at-home moms raising children, those who worked outside the home in businesses, and those who worked in academia. Because the majority of today's women not only raise children but also work outside the home, his results likely don't extend to today's women. Today, sometimes dads stay at home to raise the kids. Women often experience an empty next when after their adult children finally leave home or after they divorce and they realize they're free to pursue their own dreams and new careers. Levinson's findings may better apply to non-industrialized cultures in which women primarily stay at home to raise the children. But even in those cultures, women's worlds are expanding. Critics of Levinson's research fault his small sample size, only 45 women were interviewed, his failure to study men and women in their 50s and 60s, even though his model extended through those ages, the inability of his theory to adequately explain across all cultures and ethnic groups, and the fact that although men and women are different and perhaps prone to using different resources, they still progress through the same basic life stages, and masculinity and femininity are not opposing forces in today's culture. Carl Jung was one of the first to suggest that as people age, their gender differences diminish as they move toward a unisex or androgynous style. But sometimes they instead switch, with women becoming more aggressive and assertive, and men becoming more nurturing and passive. Younger men are more aggressive and competitive, but older men tend to be passive. This might be due to decreasing levels of testosterone in men and decreasing estrogen and progesterone in women, which intensifies the effect of their testosterone, leading to more aggressive tendencies. The term postmenopausal zest, coined by Sheehy, alludes to women's greater self-acceptance, broader worldview, new perspective, and burst of energy in their mid-50s. As social beings, social relationships and friendships continue to be important as we go through middle age. The social convoy refers to the group of people who travel with us from birth to death. Depending on your life stage, you might seek out certain friend groups or civic groups. For middle adulthood, clubs like Kiwanis, Lions, and Rotary can provide an outlet. Red Hat societies for middle-aged and older women are common, and some volunteer with YMCA, YWCA, and organizations like Habitat for Humanity. As we age, we're increasingly motivated to look for emotional meaning, which often comes from our relationships with others. Middle-aged adults seek to serve their community, and religion often takes on a more significant role and provides a source of comfort and community. Those who are religious report more marital happiness, more commitment to their relationship, and lower divorce rates. They also have the health and longevity benefit we discussed in the previous class. The vast majority of adults want to be part of a couple, and that remains a top priority throughout middle adulthood. 2/3 of middle-aged adults are married. Marriages tend to be happier when both partners share the workload more equally. Early in marriage, men express a desire for private time, while later in marriage, it's the women who express more interest in alone time. Women prefer to retire jointly with their husbands or to retire before their husband. Men seek their wives' input before making any decisions about retirement. The first longitudinal study of women at midlife, the National Longitudinal Survey of Mature Women, was conducted in the 1960s through the 80s. Heidemann found that women who have achieved higher levels of education are more likely to remain married and have lower rates of divorce. Those who marry young have higher rates of divorce. The longer a marriage survives, the less likely it will end in divorce. Having children and buying a home show emotional investment, which boosts the chances of the marriage. If the last child leaves the nest early, around 20 years of marriage, the marriage is at more risk than if the child leaves later in the marriage, after 30 years. Because the longer a marriage lasts, the better its chances of survival are, fewer middle-aged people divorce. However, when they do, it can be particularly devastating. Many will experience higher degrees of stress than from other stressors, even the death of a spouse. Men and women react to divorce differently, with men often becoming depressed and seeking a new relationship immediately, and women becoming more empowered, positive, and independent. Women typically have strong friend networks to rely upon, while men often do not have such strong support networks. Men typically depended on their wives to structure their social lives. They miss the comforts of having a wife caring for them, and they more often question their self-worth after a divorce. 5 to 6 years after the divorce, if men are unable to remarry, their rates of car accidents, drug and alcohol abuse, and emotional problems rise dramatically. In contrast, many women feel that they have gained control of their lives for the first time and look forward to new activities and possibly careers. But of course, women can also experience adjustment problems post-divorce, particularly if they become a widow or a displaced homemaker, struggling with the financial consequences of divorce. Life as a single person is becoming more feasible financially, and there's less stigma to it. Many single women choose to adopt children or have them via arts. Prior to remarriage, cohabiting is becoming much more common. Men are much more likely to remarry, in part because their pool is often larger, since for their second and sometimes serial marriages, they tend to marry younger, less educated women. As a woman's age and education level rise, the likelihood she will remarry lessens. Remarriages have higher divorce rates than first marriages. Step families or blended families are prevalent today, and with these families come additional strains. Between 1/3 and 1/2 of all new marriages involve step relationships. About 25% of all step families feature cohabiting adults with their children. Step parents are the most often overlooked group of parents, which is sad since the step-parent-child relationship is integral in the overall family's success. Step parents report less satisfaction with their family than married couples with their own biological children. Step families end in divorce more often. The struggles and adjustments that kids of divorced and blended families must make are significant. Childhood is instantly over, and they lose control over their lives. If both of their biological parents remarry, the adjustments they must make are particularly overwhelming. Kids must give up the dream they might have nurtured that their parents would get back together, and must deal with feelings of guilt if they accept the step-parent. Is that a betrayal of their absent parent? Adults typically expect love and respect immediately, but of course close relationships take time. Children have to adjust to different lifestyles, different sets of rules and expectations, and often serve as deliverers of news to each household. They're also often the keepers of secrets for their two biological parents. They learn to survive, often by lying or lying by omission, and these dysfunctional patterns can continue on into their own adult relationships. They fare better if they can maintain an easy, consistent relationship with their absent parent, and if the family is able to incorporate the step-parent in a healthy way. Zimmerman and Thayer believe that children can recover their emotional stability with time, so there is hope. Empty nest syndrome hits moms hardest if they were stay-at-home moms who wrapped up their identities in their kids. However, most middle-aged adults are able to transition smoothly into their children leaving the nest. Many look forward to time as a couple, or if without a partner, to developing new pursuits and careers. Their own adjustment is highly correlated to their perception of their kids' adjustment. Often the empty nest doesn't stay empty for too long before it fills with the returning child or with an elderly parent who requires help. Women are typically expected to care for aging parents and still assume the largest burden for childcare. On average, a woman in the U.S. spends as much time caring for aging parents as she did raising children. The sandwich generation caregiver, stuck between kids and aging parents, faces significant stress. Friendships continue to be important through midlife, and women typically have closer relationships with friends and family than men, who tend to be acquaintances with a larger number of people, usually while engaged in group activities like sports or civic groups. For both men and women, having one close friend is more important than having a large number of acquaintances, because close friends can help us recover from illnesses, surgeries, cancer, and heart attacks. Typically, our friends fulfill our everyday emotional needs, while families and spouses aid our overall well-being. Social media platforms like Facebook are becoming much more popular among middle-aged adults. Jobs that allow for self-direction seem to provide people with the greatest opportunity to achieve flow and general satisfaction. People with that freedom become more self-confident, less authoritarian, less conformist, and less fatalistic. Workers who tried to choose one over the other, either family or work, as their number one priority, actually express less overall satisfaction than those who commit to both equally but keep the two separate. When at work, they're all in, and when at home, they don't bring work home with them but are completely focused on family time. Satisfaction with work over the course of the lifetime follows a U-shape, with the youngest and the oldest workers feeling the most satisfied. One theory proposes that younger workers want a casual environment where their ideas are heard. Google took this concept and ran with it, changing the workplace values to new ones that allow workers to question authority rather than expecting obedience. Some theorists believe that when just starting out, young people have very low expectations. Any paying job will be great. And older people have worked their way up to more fulfilling positions, but those in the middle are the ones who are still striving to move somewhere else. Workers who go into professional, high-paying career tracks often experience dissatisfaction in midlife but fear leaving the career because of the financial security and prestige they have established. Some point to this to explain why suicide rates rise, particularly among men, in middle age. Those struggling to make ends meet don't have the luxury of considering a career change to become more satisfied. Rather, they often work multiple jobs to pay the bills and are looking for better-paying jobs. But regardless of the motivation, at midlife, many people do take stock of their lives, their careers, and decide to make changes. There appear to be 4 stages that people progress through when unemployed, due to forced early retirements or layoffs. Initially, they feel a sense of relief, especially if they knew layoffs were coming. Then they get serious about trying to find another job, but if they don't find one, they enter the 3rd stage, in which their self-esteem takes a hit, they doubt their abilities, anxieties rise, and their outlook becomes bleak. In the 4th stage, they become resigned and withdraw. People who have remained unemployed have a much higher risk for divorce. Men often feel emasculated and can lash out, so domestic abuse can occur after prolonged unemployment. Alcoholism and drug problems are also common. Many communities have established career centers and internet sites to help job hunters, and community colleges cater to people wanting to get training for new careers. In studying what happens to people after they retire, Nancy Schlossberg profiled 6 different types of retirees: continuers, who stay connected; adventurers, who start something new; searchers, who seek a new niche; easy gliders, who enjoy no schedule and go along with things; involved spectators, who stay connected with their past but in a new role; and retreaters, who become depressed and give up.